Hello and welcome to the World Wonders podcast. I am Ryan.
I'm Amanda and we're your hosts.
And today we're going to be talking about education. Ta-da.
Yes. Not education in the way that you might be thinking of it. Education while you're traveling.
Yeah, and specifically kind of contrasting our experiences, learning things.
Learning things in the classroom versus learning things on the road.
Going to university, and that's the style of learning you're kind of pushed into versus the style of learning you get when you go see new places and do new things.
Yeah, and before we get into today's topic, we just wanted to throw a quick thank you out to Chris Jeffrey, who reached out to us on our Facebook page, The World Wanders, and suggested a page called patreon.com where people can support creative anything.
Content.
Yeah, creative content, anything creative like podcasts, YouTube channels, that sort of thing. And he is our first supporter. So that's amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. And if anyone else wants to support the podcast, it's patreon.com/theworldwanders.
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. So one of the things that I love about traveling, especially traveling over a long term, is that it really gives me the opportunity to kind of develop myself as a person. And we're going to get into some specific areas that we feel travel is really good at learning for. Travel is good at learning for. Apparently it's not good at learning language or learning English.
Just other languages.
But just before, one of the things, I think we both kind of went through kind of the traditional path of going to high school. And then after high school, there really wasn't any thought about, do you go to university? Do you explore what you want to do through other types of education? I know for me, like all my friends were going to university. It was never a question in my home growing up. You go to university and then you get a job and then you work your way up the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, it was the same for me. And I think I don't know, the way I think about it is that I was really given the choice to go to university or not. And I feel like that's how it was. I really liked school though, and I really thrived off of being praised for doing well in school by teachers and parents and other students and that sort of thing. So there was no part of me that doubted that I wanted to go to university. It just felt like that's what I was going to do. What else would I have done? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely felt the idea of traveling right out of high school wasn't something that was on my potential list of options, because I didn't really know anyone who was going to do anything like that. But the idea I want to touch on was that it's kind of thought of as the education is about getting credentials in kind of the mainstream. I think this is changing in a lot of ways, but you need to get a credential so that you can move on with your life. Mm-hmm. And that's the university credential. Whereas it's not focused on, you need to build as many skills as possible. Because when you stop and you're like, oh, I'm going to find this opportunity to invest my money and my time in terms of becoming a better person. When you're asking that question, the opportunities are much broader than just go to university.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because, I mean, I think that whenever university was developed years and years ago, the point was to learn different skills and to take classes that you were really interested in and to gain all this knowledge. And it seems like now people are kind of just pushed through, it's high school, it's university. You got to go to university to get a good job. You're going to be a failure if you don't go to university. So people just go, and it becomes a lot more about oh, what's the best party school I can go to? Or, what's the easiest class I can take this semester? Or, that sort of thing, as opposed to being I'm really interested in this topic, so I'm going to study it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's people out there who do take university like that. But I feel the majority of people, it's really about, I need to get this degree. How can I do it with the best grades in the easiest way possible for me?
Yeah, and it's you're playing the game that that you think you're playing. So like in your perspective, when you're going to a university, you're like winning more than the people who didn't. And when you're at the university, like if your school's better than some of your high school friends' school, then you're like, oh, I'm winning.
Yeah.
This game.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous.
And one thing that I look back on my life, I'm pretty happy with how it went. And I think I did gain a lot of skills at being like an adult from going to university, but I feel like they were kind of like side effects. And that if I could talk to my 17-year-old self as I was like packing up to go to university, I definitely would recommend, instead of going to university, go out and spend a year traveling and see what that does for your life.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting for me because like you said that you didn't have any friends who were doing anything other than university. And one of my best friends was actually going traveling. And then I had actually a few other friends who weren't going to school right away. So I did have like people in my life who were doing other things. And this sounds so ridiculous when I say it out loud, but my rationalization was, if I don't go to school right now and I go traveling, I might never go to school. And to me, that was like a negative thing. Like I was like, what am I going to do with my life if I don't go to school? Like I can't just be this like gypsy hippie that's like running around for the rest of my life.
It's kind of funny. I feel like I've encountered that logic with a few people. Like it's kind of like I don't know, maybe like this is obviously an extreme metaphor, but like the prisoner in the prison who's like, oh, I'm pretty content here. If I left, I might not be so content if I have to come back. It's like, well, yeah, it's not a reason to not go.
Yeah. And something that's, makes this topic really relevant for me is I was really focused on grades in university. Like it wasn't about the knowledge I was actually learning. It was how much knowledge can I shove into my brain to regurgitate for a test before I can like throw it in the trash can. So this topic's really interesting for me because some of the things we're going to talk about, I was like, wow, I'm like learning this for the first time. And it's like, no, like you learned that thing in history class in social studies, like, years ago. And I'm like, what? And it's just, that's kind of what most of my life has been. It's about getting grades and doing well in school. So I've shoved information inside of my brain and then threw it down on a piece of paper to get the good grade for it. And I've forgotten about it. And it's been really like irrelevant for me.
Because there's no practical application of the things you're learning. The only thing you can do with them is be tested on them. And then like you can't actually actively use them in your life other than like, oh, hey, fun fact.
Yeah.
I learned this today. And I think so, like the first thing we wanted to talk about, and I think the area where this is like most obvious is learning a language.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. In Canada, you're required to take French as a language until a certain level in school. And I took French from grade 4 until grade 10. So it's like 6 years of French, and my French is atrocious. Like I couldn't even hold a basic conversation with a French person past like, hi, how are you? What's your name? And same with Spanish. I studied Spanish from grade 9 to grade 12. And then, Ryan and I show up in Spain on our first backpacking trip, and it's like, what's the word for chicken again? How do I ask for a meal? Like I had no concept of these things.
Yeah. I remember that trip, and we were going to quite a few countries in Europe. So we didn't really have the time to like really focus in on one language. But I remember when we got to Spain, I had a little phrase book and I was trying to learn some words. But yeah, when we arrive and get into a situation where we're at a train station, we're trying to book a train, go up to the window, and we're like, do you speak English? I think we asked in Spanish. And he's like, no. And then we're like,
like, oh shit.
These things you've learned, but you just really have because when you're learning for a test, like you don't, like you have like a few words, but you don't know how to use them. You've forgotten most of the stuff you're learning.
Yeah, definitely.
And then so when we went to South America, one of the things we really both really wanted to focus on was learning Spanish.
Yeah. Like becoming conversational in it. And it's crazy the difference in being in a classroom for 1 hour, going through some grammar, and actually needing to purchase a bus ticket and having no way to do it other than learn the words to communicate them. It's such a huge difference in terms of, you know, really wanting to learn it. Because it's like, oh yeah, like I'm going to just leave this classroom and me and my friends are going to speak English in the hallways. And, you know, I don't really have to think about this until the next class, like 2 days from now. And then I don't really have to think about the stuff I'm learning until the test, and then I can forget about it. Whereas when you're in that country, learning that language, it's useful to you every single day. So it's this motivation to learn it, and then you're practicing it constantly, and it becomes just so much more relevant and so much easier to learn.
And yeah, and it becomes fun instead of being work. And I know even before we went, we bought a Rosetta Stone. I don't know how far, like 8 months before we were going or something like that. And used it I used it a few times. I think you used it a few times, and then just stopped entirely because it wasn't fun to go through.
Yeah, and that was kind of the same. I think I used Duolingo a little bit more because I could use it kind of walking from my desk at my office job to the washroom, and then as I was going to the washroom and then back, I could get through like a few lessons. But it's like, how much are you really learning when it's like La manzana es verde? Like, I don't think I spoke that phrase a single time in 6 months in South America. But yeah, I think fun is like a really, really key word in that. And that's something that I found traveling is like these things that I was learning, all of a sudden I was interested in them. And I was like, wow, you know, I'm really interested in learning this language, and I'm interested in communicating with these people, and I'm interested in, you know, I'm interested in learning, and I'm not being forced to do it. What a concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting to think about people who go to university. We both did business degrees, but some people will go to a university or college and become a Spanish major.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I lived with a Spanish minor. Sorry, a girl who minored in Spanish.
He was from Valencia, and he mined coal in the Albertan mountains. But yeah, like when you think about, what are your motivations for becoming a Spanish major at school? Like, you could, instead of spending all that money to go to this expensive program and learn in this weird context, maybe you're going to do a couple exchanges, but like, why don't you just take that money, head somewhere that speaks Spanish, and learn about the culture there? Like, learn the language, read the books, talk to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Like, that's a really good point. And I think too, there's even a girl who's part of the program that you're doing right now, called Praxis. And she was talking about how she was a Spanish major before she dropped out of school. And she actually went to Spain to live because she's like, I wasn't really learning any Spanish, like living in Texas in the US. I mean, there's quite a bit of Hispanic culture there, but she just wasn't learning it and using it every day. And now she speaks beautiful Spanish, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah. So one of the things that's great about traveling is that you get the context to learn something that you don't get when you're trying to learn it at home.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's this opportunity to learn it in a way that makes it interesting and fun that you don't have when you're forced to sit at a desk and study something.
Yeah, and I think there's like it's kind of tough because I think there are some things where like I would like to become fluent in Spanish. And since we got back from our trip, I spent there was a while where I didn't practice, and then I went into a stretch of a few months where I was really practicing quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And now I don't know, it's been like 3 months since I really devoted myself to practicing Spanish at all. So it's a situation where if someone asks you, do you want to learn? And I'm like, yeah. But if you look at my behavior, you're like, oh, well, you're not doing anything. So do you actually want to learn?
Yeah. And it's pretty easy to get caught up in the like you're super busy. It's hard to add that to your life. If you don't do it for a few days, it's really easy to kind of fall off the wagon. Like, I don't know, like exercising or dieting. Like it needs to be a part of your day-to-day routine for it to be a habit. And it's hard to add something like that when you're not really getting any like value out of it right away. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like you're practicing the Spanish, you're learning it, you do it for like 3 days, you feel really good, but you have no way of getting any like feedback about how you're doing because you're not actually using it, you're just learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you don't do it for a day, and then it's been like, 3 to 5 days that you haven't done it, and then you're like, oh. Or at least, I don't know, maybe somebody out there is much better at learning a language than I am, but that's kind of been how it's been for me. And I've, gone through a few stints of being on the Spanish bandwagon and then falling off of it again.
And I think it's tough because to learn a language, you need to have some energy to apply to it. And if you're working through the day, the time, your free time is kind of low energy time other than the morning. So you come home from work, and if you're feeling low energy, it's hard to convince yourself to do something that does require energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Something that I want to sort of touch on that's a little bit similar to that concept, and it's really relevant for me, is learning about history while traveling. It's one of these things that, prior to traveling, if somebody was like, are you interested in history? I would have been like, absolutely not. I hate history. I hate history classes. I mean, if you looked at the things I studied in university, I avoided history at all costs. So I was like, I hate learning about this. Like documentaries on history, like not interested. And then I went traveling, and all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, there's like some really cool aspects of history. Like history from a textbook it's not interesting. It's super condensed. It's kind of one-sided in terms of opinions of what went down. And it's cool to be able to actually explore places and hear, other sides of things, and what really happened, and to learn about things that have happened in this world that, school systems don't even teach you. Like, for example, going to Cambodia and learning about the Khmer Rouge, and I mean, hundreds of thousands of Cambodian people. Is that right? Hundreds of thousands?
Million.
Yeah, millions of Cambodian people were tortured and killed in a really, really violent and atrocious way. And yet I had no idea that that happened until I got to Asia. And so travel provides you with this exciting way to learn about history. And, or if you're already interested in history, it's really cool to see these things that you've seen on television or you've read about in books firsthand, and to really form your own opinion and to really like be able to see that and experience it, or to learn about things that you've never been taught about. It's crazy to think that those things happen. And, there wasn't social media back then, so everybody didn't know about it. People weren't tweeting about being tortured.
Well, I'm pretty sure that was covered pretty widely in the news at that time.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was in the 70s. That's pre my existence, however.
And one of the things that I noticed once we went traveling is all these kind of stories that you're fed about things, about the way things have happened in the past, have a lot more like depth to them. When you're kind of taught about World War II and you do like a World War II unit in social studies, the school system in general is really about having this person in a position of authority telling you about all the answers that have been figured out without you. Like, oh, hey, like we've got this thing nailed down, like Nazis were evil. They did this horrible thing. heroes came, rushed in to save them. Boom, problem solved. And obviously that's an oversimplification of what was already an oversimplification, but you kind of learn these if you go through like the kind of type of education we went through, which is like public school into, you know, kind of just random university. You're like, at least you get kind of these simple narrative stories about things that happened, and it's all really like sealed up. Like, this is what happened. We know that there aren't really many questions left to be answered. And then when you go, so I left going to Europe for the first time, and you kind of have this image about like this horrible thing that happened in Europe, and the Germans were the bad guys. And obviously if I'd like taken time to think about it, I'd know, oh, hey, like, why did this happen? Like, why would people go along with such a terrible thing?
Like, you'd think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, but you still kind of have in your head, like, oh, you kind of taught these things and about these guys were the bad guys. Maybe the Russians are the bad guys for a while. And then you go traveling and you start to meet people, and all of your assumptions based off nationality are completely wrong. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, I don't know how related to history it is, but you kind of learn that nationalism is a bit ridiculous. That like what the values you share as human beings are so much more important than any differences you might get because of the culture of where you grew up.
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting point for sure.
And history, when taught through the school system, is so much about this like national lens on it, because usually a lot of the school system is really dictated by government. So the Canadian education system is about teaching you history of Canada. And so your lens on the world comes from this like Canadian perspective. And when you go traveling, you get to see all these other perspectives on history. Yeah,
which is super cool. And I guess maybe cool is not the word, but it's interesting for sure, because I feel like it really opens your views on the world, and it opens your mind to other possibilities, and it really encourages you to learn things that you've never really learned before, or think about things that you've never really thought about before in a different way.
Yeah, I remember going to the Cu Chi tunnels in Vietnam and having, for anyone who doesn't know, these are tunnels that the communist Vietnamese were using in the Vietnam War to hide out and kind of conduct their guerrilla warfare. And when you go there now, it's like very highly propagandized against the like imperialist Americans. So there's all these stories about everything was delightful, and there was farmers and fields, and then they just got, you know, firebombed by the evil Americans. And you kind of recognize that, okay, this is quite an elaborate one-sided story here, but then it gets you thinking, like, what was the side of the story that I was presented with? How ridiculous was that? Mm-hmm. I don't think it was the same level, but like you start to think about it. And something that happened when I went to Prague, I had the opportunity to go to the Communist Museum there, and you can see this communist propaganda and about just how evil the capitalists are. And you're like, oh, it's kind of funny that people will like use the terms, like we get the same thing over here about how evil the communists were. And it's just this one type of people cast as a villain. I feel like I'm rambling, but
no, I think that that's a good point for sharing, a good example. I guess so. To kind of tie what you were saying back is that, you know, whether or not you're a history buff or not, traveling really gives you the opportunity to learn about the world and to get a whole bunch of different viewpoints. Whether or not it, you know, lets you see that what you learned in school is a very limited viewpoint, or if it shows you that, or teaches you a very limited viewpoint over there. But either way, it gives you this opportunity to think about the things that have happened in the world and to just really take them in and form your own opinion, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And the one lesson I think I've learned by turning into like a self-educator after university is that the one thing that the educational system's really good at is taking interesting subjects and making them really boring and unappealing.
Bam. So something that Ryan and I have both really learned and improved on through traveling is our communication and our social skills. I mean, I guess so in terms of like societal labels, I'm more extroverted. I talk easily with people and I'm chatty and I'm not overly shy. But at the same time, it's like traveling gave me sort of a different viewpoint on that because, you know, I was extroverted with people I was comfortable with, and I was extroverted with people that, you know, were like me or that, you know, dressed or acted or did the same activities as me. And going to a hostel dorm room, I mean, you get people from all walks of life doing totally different things from all different countries. And one of the things that I quickly learned on our first backpacking trip is that you can have a really great conversation with somebody who's nothing like you are. They come from a different country. They have a different background. Their family system's different. Their values might be different than yours. They dress completely different. And, you know, maybe at home, this person's somebody that you would never even give the time of day to, but you're in a hostel dorm room. You know, you're not going to just brush them off and ignore them. And it's super cool to discover that, you know, we're all just human. Like, we're all just people below these like labels that have been put on us or that we've put on ourselves. We're just people. And it's really cool to learn that because it really changes the way that you interact with people going forward, or at least it did for me. Do you have something to add to that?
So I can identify with the feeling. Or one thing that I really learned traveling was that usually the assumptions you make about people are wrong. Like at least the snap judgments. Like you'll meet someone and they seem like kind of this like ditzy girl who's like not really well thought out. And then if you get into a conversation, instead of like dismissing this person, you're like, oh, this person actually has like a lot of like really interesting perspectives on things. And that kind of happens time and time again while you're traveling. You're like, you make these snap judgments of someone and then, which I think is completely natural to do. I think that's just kind of human nature.
Yeah. I think we all do it.
To like see a few things and then make a whole picture out of those few things that we do see. Mm-hmm. So traveling really teaches you, because you're having so many interactions with so many people from so many places, that most of the time your like face value, they're like your snap judgments are wrong. And that when you get to know someone, you don't just assume who they are and then kind of avoid them or talk to them based off that, but actually trying to get to know people on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it's something that I think carries over nicely when you get back home. You know, like thinking about, you go to the grocery store and you make this assumption on the person who works behind the till. You know, you assume that maybe they're uneducated or they're poor because they work at a grocery store, and that's not a very quote unquote like good job. But it's like if you've had experiences with people from all over the world with different backgrounds and you've talked to them on a deeper level and gotten to know them, then maybe you can put yourself in a position where you can think about, you know, I wonder what this person's story is. And I wonder, you know, why they work here, what they like about it. You know, do they have a young child at home that they need to work for? Like, you just start wondering these things instead of just judging people right away.
And why do you think that happens from traveling?
What do you mean? Why do I think that happens?
Like, why do you think you learn that while you're traveling?
Oh, I think because travel puts you in these situations where, you know, you make these snap judgments, but then you have these opportunities to get to know people a little bit better. And then you learn that people aren't always what you think they are right off the get-go. You learn that they're different, or, you know, they've got this interesting past, or, you know, that they've got problems in their life too. And that, you know, they're just another human being.
And then so when you come home, you kind of take that approach to people that you wouldn't really have thought of before?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that as well? Like, I guess just like more curiosity for people who maybe I wouldn't have been curious about before, because I would have just written them off as somebody who's like, oh yeah, like that's not my person. Like I wouldn't be friends with them. Like no need to start a conversation with them. But you can have conversations with anyone and it can be really interesting sometimes. I mean, not always, but sometimes it is.
Yeah. So it makes you think about one of the things that I really like about the environment that you get when you're traveling and staying in hostels is that most people have a really open, most people are kind of like looking to meet people and make friends and connect with other people. Mm-hmm. Not make friends for the long term, but make friends for like while they're there. They want to know, like, you want to know who the people that are in your dorm room are, like where they're from, what they do. You're kind of maybe on the lookout for someone you can really connect with. And I feel like when you're not traveling and you're working a job and living in a city that you've lived in for a while, you kind of become very stable in your life and you're not really looking to, meet new people.
Yeah, it's kind of something that we talked about in one of the recent episodes that we did on making friends in a new city, because it's something that I was sort of struggling with here in Atlanta, is like, going to fitness classes or like going to coffee shops and being like, these people are content in their lives. They don't really like care to get to know me because they're not looking to add a friend to their life. Whereas when you're traveling, like, I mean, you want to have good rapport, be allies with the people in your dorm room. Like all your stuff's there. You don't want them to steal your stuff. You want them to say something if somebody random walked in to steal stuff. And I mean, more than that, you are searching for connection because, if you're traveling alone, it's really nice to have that connection with somebody else. And I mean, even if you're traveling with a friend or as a couple like we have, it's really great when you can add a couple people to, your dinner or your adventures for that day, because it's really nice to talk to people who's not just you or I.
Yeah. And it's something like you're at, the lounge in a hostel and you're talking to people and then you're like, oh, hey, like we're about to go for dinner. Do you want to come? Or like, what are you doing tomorrow? We're going to go do this. Do you want to come? Mm-hmm. Like you find opportunities to move your friendships along that you don't really find at home. Like if you meet someone new, you might be like, oh, hey, like maybe we could go for a coffee one time or go for a coffee sometime in the future. It's not like, hey, let's go do this tomorrow and like this the next day.
Yeah. You're not like only in the same city for a short period of time.
And one of the things just for me personally that I found very valuable about traveling is just the opportunities you have to talk to people. So I went in traveling the first time kind of having a bit of more of like a shy demeanor.
Yeah.
And feeling like sometimes at like a loss for words when talking to people and not really knowing how to like start in a conversation, be assertive about meeting people. And then over time, as you're traveling, you just have so much opportunity to practice social skills, and social skills are definitely skills. And so if you go to university, I think you do get this opportunity to like build a new network, meet new people, but it's also easy to like find your way into kind of a safe area and then just stick there and not really challenge yourself to like get out and be outside of your comfort zone, meeting new people all the time. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to exist traveling if you're not getting out of your comfort zone, at least socially,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think it'd be a pretty lonely experience. Like if you were never talking to people in your dorm rooms and you were, not engaging with people on walking tours or going out on things like pub crawls or inviting other people to come eat with you. Like I feel like it would be pretty lonely. Like I feel like for me, I know like I craved, human interaction and human connection for sure.
And then the last subject we're going to hit on is finances and budgeting, because when you're living day to day, you don't really have to, you kind of just get a feel for like how much money you're spending, how much money you're making. And it's easy to just kind of like find, well, maybe it's not easy for a lot of people.
I think it's really difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah. But you can find kind of a sense of balance where, you know, I'm making this much, I'm spending whatever. My credit card bills aren't unpayable, so that's fine. That's like my warning sign. But to go on a trip, you need to have accumulated enough money that's going to last you for 6 months, however many months you want to go for. So it requires quite a bit of delayed gratification before going. And then once you start traveling, you need to strike this balance all the time between spending money to do the cool things in the town you're in versus having more money to go on your trip later on. So you're really like learning this lesson about delayed versus instant gratification kind of like all the time. And you have to like fine tune and learn about that. Like, do I want to go on this trip to like this boat penguin trip, or do I want to spend another week in Peru?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think budgeting was really difficult for me, or like saving money was difficult for me when in between our 2 trips, because I was making enough money to pay off, you know, my bills and to live like a pretty comfortable life for a 23-year-old. I was trying to think of how old I was then, a 23-year-old. And, you know, I was easily making enough to put away a couple $100s every single month. But it was difficult because, you know, my friends weren't saving for the same thing. So I'd be like, hey, let's go shopping this weekend. Oh yeah, sure. I can afford to do that. Or let's go out for drinks tonight, or let's go grab a coffee. And it's interesting how fast those things add up. You and I both used a budget app called Back in Black, which I actually still use and find incredibly helpful for my budgeting on a day-to-day basis. Ryan stopped using that a while ago.
It would be very scary for me if I started using Back in Black again.
But it became really interesting to me where, like, you know, I had friends who made more money than me and they're like, I can't save any money. I'm like, well, how much do you spend on Starbucks every week? Well, I don't know, like a coffee every day. Well, that's $4 for a latte times 7 days a week. That's $28 a week. So times that by 4, that's 50, 80, 96.
28 times 4?
Yeah.
It's 104.
Okay. That's clearly not fine-tuning my math skills over here in Atlanta. So think about that much. So if you bought coffee at home or made coffee at home and took it with you to work and didn't spend money on your Starbucks every day for 1 month, you'd have $112 more than you had before. If you save $112 for 12 months, you've got enough money for, you know, flights plus, you know, a couple weeks in a South American country.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that you say that. It makes me think about like the money I spend on lunch right now. Yeah. It's funny because you can like learn things and then you unlearn them. Like I feel like when you're traveling, there's so much incentive. Pre-travel, there's so much incentive to save money because like there's this awesome thing you want to do. You can picture it. It's very real to you. Mm-hmm. When you're traveling, there's a lot of incentive to be monitoring your money because you got to know like, hey, I'm going to run out of money. Then I got to go home. And then definitely. You can come back and start working again and you're like, oh, whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, coming back and getting a paycheck is one of the, I don't know, I think it's like kind of a scary thing in terms of budgeting because if you've been on this big trip or you've been monitoring your money very closely and you're like, okay, like I need to only spend like $30 a day here, or maybe it's more, maybe it's less. I know a lot of people, especially in South American or Asian countries, will spend way less than that in a day. You get home and all of a sudden you've got this regular paycheck coming in and it's just like throwing dollar bills around because you've got so much money now coming in and you don't have to monitor it as much. But it's really important to think about, or I think it's really important to think about, you know, the value that you're getting out of something. So if I go back to that, you know, Starbucks example, you know, is your latte worth $5 to you every day? Or would you rather have $100 in the bank at the end of the month.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about it over a longer period of time. Like, if you look back in time and you're saying, like, were all the espresso beverages you drank last year worth $150? Wait, it was way more than that, wasn't it? It was like $1,000.
It was like $1,200.
Like, were all the espresso beverages you drank last year worth like $600? And you'd be like, probably like, no. Like, looking back on it, I didn't get that much value out of it. At the time, though, like, when you're like, are you willing to pay this for this? Like, the only reason you ever make a purchase in that moment is because you value the thing you're getting more than the money you have. But when your time perspective changes on it, you look back and say, oh, those things that I thought provided me a bunch of value, really, when I look back on them now, they didn't provide me as much value as I would have. I would maybe make that trade-off if I could go back in time.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I also think about with that is, so if you add on, your after work beer/wine endeavors, how much does that add? It's probably like at least $7 plus a tip. So let's say $10. I mean, even if you go like a couple times a week, like that adds up significantly. And that's something that I think about in terms of, saving for both of my trips, like especially pre-university, because I was going out with friends a ton. I was drinking a lot. And there was points where I was desperately trying to save for that trip, and I would throw only like $20 in my wallet, and I'd leave all my cards at home. So it was like, if you spend more than this $20 at drinks at the bar, you actually can't afford to get home. Like, you're going to have to like either walk home or hitchhike home or like barter a ride home or something like that. Like, that's how like bad I was with money when I was drinking. And so that's something that, if you're not saving for anything, and I mean, maybe it's not a trip, maybe it's a car or a house or a baby you plan to have in the future. But I find when you don't have a savings goal, it's really easy to just throw money around. And that concept is interesting too when you're on the road, because there's lots of opportunities to go out for, drinks with new friends that you've met. And same with coffee. I mean, you can spend that money the same way while you're abroad. It's not just an at-home thing. And it's interesting how you become so much more aware of where, your money's going when you're in a place and you're like, oh, well, like, do I really want a second beer? Like, I really wanted to go see X tomorrow, and X costs $6 and this drink costs $6. So like, I'll pass. I feel like it's way easier to put that into perspective when you're somewhere cool and you're going to do something cool than when you're just at home.
And it's like, you can see the benefit you're going to get from saving. It's like so clear when you're traveling.
Yeah. And so something that I've done, like my budget app's cool because you can add in a savings goal with it. Like, you can put something. So sometimes I just put like a travel fund. Like, even if I don't have a trip coming up, it's this way.
But this is something we talked about before. When you have like a non-real thing happening, it's really hard to actually follow through.
It is hard to follow through, but at the same time, if like you're actively using an app and like every month it's like negative 100, like you spent over your amount of money, like it feels bad after a while. Like, it kind of gets you feeling down. And I think for me, it really helped me to like motivate myself to be like, no, like sometime in the next year, I want to take a trip. Like, even if it's a weekend away with friends, you can put that stuff in there.
Yeah. But it's I think the thing that's kind of common throughout like all the learning you do while you're traveling is that compared to just being in an education system or like looking for a course you can take, there's all these, when you kind of change your circumstances, there's all these opportunities for you to learn new things because the incentives for you to learn them are higher, whether that's a new language or improving your social skills, improving your understanding of history, or improving your ability to budget, and a host of other things.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this podcast could go on for like 3 hours if we started talking about everything that you can learn better abroad than you can learn at home. Like
And you can learn things at home, obviously.
Yeah. And I feel like we're not saying that you can't learn things at home. I don't think that that's what this podcast has been about. It's just been about this concept of how, those 4 things that we've talked about have been easier for us to learn while traveling than they have been at home. And they've been more fun as well, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, budgeting's not really a fun thing. It's not in the category of like, oh, what are you going to do tonight? Oh, I'm going to do my budget and it's going to be awesome. But budgeting is a lot more fun when you're budgeting for things. Like when you're like, oh, yes, I'm putting $20 aside tomorrow to check out the Louvre because I've dreamed of seeing this museum for 10 years and it's going to be the best experience of my whole life. Makes budgeting fun.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us on Facebook, The World Wanders, or on Twitter. Once again, The World Wanders, or you can check out the show notes at www.theworldwanders.com. We're always happy to hear from you. And as always, thanks for listening.
Until next time.